So the March update for Destiny 2 is coming next week. And as we saw a few days ago, Bungie are introducing this. So clearly Destiny 2 is now saved. Only joking, it's just a sparrow with no seat. Actually, it looks pretty fun, I think, but this and a whole bunch of other changes are dropping in the game. We've got Guardian Games itself, but also 5 brand new weapons being introduced into the game. A load of weapons will get new perk possibilities as well, but Bungie are bringing in new PvP armor, a massive list of sandbox changes, exotic buffs, reworks, and revamps to a bunch of content that's already in the game right now. So without a doubt, it's one of the biggest mid-season updates that we've ever seen for the game, and we're going to break down some of the top changes today in case you guys are curious about jumping back in. So as always, I hope you enjoy this one, and firstly, yes, Guardian Games is kicking off on the 5th of March, and it's going to be a relatively similar event to what we've seen in previous years, but Bungie are introducing this new vehicle type, the exotic skimmer, and at least the first 2 of these that are introduced will be exotic variants. There's one that all players can earn during the event, and Bungie say this is the All-Star Vector, and we simply need to pick it up from Eva Levante after completing the onboarding mission quest. But there'll be a separate quest that we need to complete if we want to keep it permanently after the event concludes. That's curious in itself, but that's a component that's available to all players. And Bungie also say there'll be an additional skimmer available in the Eververse store, so that's something we can look out for, and maybe we'll be able to pick it up for Bright Dust at some point during the event. So give us your thoughts on that. I'm curious to try it out, but otherwise we're going to see a handful of new weapons in the event. The first one is also from Guardian Games, and this is the Hullabaloo, an arc compressed waveframe heavy grenade launcher. Bungie have teased it will be able to roll things like Volt Shot and Chain Reaction at the same time, which is certainly interesting. But another cool component is that Bungie are increasing damage of this archetype by 20%, and they're increasing the wave width by 40% during this update. So with a good perk roll, actually, this thing could be pretty beastie, and of course it will affect all other weapons in that archetype as well. That's a separate buff that we'll touch on in a moment, but there'll also be a new memento for Guardian Games, and Bungie have updated the perk pools for the existing weapons for the event, so that'll be pretty cool. But we're also going to get brand new weapons for other playlists, and firstly, Trials of Osiris will get a new scout rifle called the Prophet. That's an aggressive frame stasis scout rifle, and Bungie are also introducing some new ways for players to more reliably earn adept weapons, which we'll touch on in a moment. But for the Iron Banner, there'll be a new grenade launcher called Tusk of the Boar, and this is a waveframe special launcher, and it comes with strand damage, so that'll be cool to check out. But then the Nightfall gets 2 brand new weapons. One is the Wild Style, and this is the double fire frame solar grenade launcher, but also a brand new sword which is called the Slammer, and that's a heavy ammo vortex frame stasis sword. So we can't see the perks for those yet, but 5 brand new weapons is certainly something to look forward to, and let us know any that stand out to you in the comment section. Next up though, Bungie are also reprising a bunch of weapons, and firstly, that includes the Prophecy Dungeon loot pool. So Prophecy guns are getting a new origin trait called Crossing Over, and the weapons have increased range and handling for the top half of the magazine, while rounds from the bottom half of the mag deal increased damage. Actually, going to be a pretty good origin trait potentially on a handful of weapons. But they'll be updating the Prosecutor auto rifle, which will have arc damage, and that's a precision frame, as well as the Adjudicator SMG, and that's a precision frame kinetic SMG. Plus the Relentless Pulse rifle will see the damage type change from kinetic to strand, and that is of course a high impact frame pulse. And then the Judgment Hand Cannon will go from kinetic to stasis. That's an adaptive frame, with the Darkest Before Pulse rifle, which is a rapid fire frame, changing from arc to solar, and the Sudden Death Shotgun, which is an aggressive frame, will change from arc to void, and all of them will additionally get new perks. So a renewed reason to head into the Prophecy Dungeon is always welcomed as well. So give us your thoughts on those weapon adjustments, but something to keep in mind here. And starting March 5th, players will be able to visit the Eververse store to claim 700 Bright Dust every week. So if you need a little bump for the Guardian Games armor or something, that could be helpful early on. Otherwise, it's certainly worth just grabbing that Bright Dust because, well, it's free. And yeah, that probably means Bungie will remove it in the final shape or something ridiculous. Only joking, that's not confirmed. The next thing to touch on though are major PvP updates. Now this is a really significant list, so we're not going to touch on absolutely everything, but in terms of rewards, Competitive Crucible will see the introduction of Artifice Armor, and we'll be able to earn this from a new Competitive Division weekly challenge. So that's cool, and it's a new option for PvP players in particular. Plus Bungie are buffing the chance to get exotic weapon catalysts on competitive victories, so any of the playlist catalysts will now have a better drop chance inside of comp. We spoke about the new Trials passage when we were touching on weapons before, and Bungie will be introducing the Passage of Persistence, and losses following a win will remove the win from your card, but consecutive losses do not remove additional wins. So it's basically a way for players to not go absolutely flawless, but to get to 7 wins slowly over time on the same card, which gives more players a chance to get adept weapons. Adept weapons won't be farmable at the end of that card in the way they are when you go flawless, but it means more players have chances to pick those weapons up, and that will include the brand new one, the Prophet Scout Rifle, so it's something else to think about. On top of that though, Bungie have revealed major changes for PvP Sandbox, and that's from weapon adjustments to ammo spawns, matchmaking changes, map quality of life, and some significant ability tuning. So I'll link separate articles and videos about all of those changes down below, but some big adjustments to general combat include that Bungie are increasing player health in the Crucible by 30 health points, which will give players 100 health up from 70. So you can imagine the sort of adjustment that will make to PvP Sandbox overall. But on top of that, Bungie have said melee, grenade, and the class ability cooldowns now have a 15% penalty applied to them in Crucible only, with super cooldowns having a 20% penalty applied in Crucible. So ability cooldowns overall are going to slow down in PvP, but to compensate for the changes with player health, Bungie are increasing base super damage by 31% and base melee damage by 16%. And that's just a small taste of some of the sandbox changes that are happening in Crucible. So especially for people who play a lot of PvP, there are going to be some very noticeable changes for the Crucible sandbox, and I'd love to get your thoughts about that below. We're also going to see a lot of weapon buffs as well with this update. So for things like rocket launchers, Bungie are increasing reserve ammo by 2 on precision and high impact launchers, plus they're reducing the damage penalty from -10 to -5 on precision launchers, and allowing high impact launchers to cause more detonation damage. And those changes will affect Deathbringer, Galahorn, and Truth as well. Then for heavy grenade launchers, they're increasing reserve ammo by a minimum of 6 rounds and a maximum of 10, depending on the archetype. Then we've got things like the Waveframe heavy grenade launcher buff, and a buff for caster swords where they're reducing the heavy attack energy cost from 5 to 4, as well as increasing the heavy attack damage by 16%. So some of the legendary adjustments will be pretty significant, but there are also exotic specific buffs like the Edge of Action buff, where they're increasing damage resistance against all combatants except bosses to 85%, and that applies to the bubble that Edge of Action can create. And for Manticore, the exotic SMG, while anti-grav thrusters are engaged, combatants will be less accurate when targeting the player, so we should take less damage, and with the Catalyst, final blows and sustained damage with Manticore while airborne will grant a void overshield and return ammo to the magazine. So that's certainly going to be one to try, as will the Exteris, and they've increased the impact damage against PvE enemies by 50%, and that works out to a total damage buff of about 20%, but they've also increased the maximum rate of fire by 17%. So perhaps worth whipping out a few of those exotics we haven't touched for a few months. Very finally though, we're getting a lot of general ability changes across the board for the game, and a quick rundown includes stuff like a reduction in uptime for Threaded Spectre, a few changes to threadlings to make them easier to deal with in Crucible, fixes for the restoration timer issues on solar subclasses, and buffs for things like Ember of Mercy and Ember of Empyrean, where they're increasing the duration of both of those fragments. Plus they'll improve the consistency of things like Sunbreaker's Consecration, and adjustments for Gunpowder Gamble to reduce the maximum self-damage, generally making it slightly less self-lethal. But again, much like the PvP changes, I'll post a separate video down below with all of the ability stuff. And I think if you were to go in depth with all of the changes that we actually get in this patch, you could end up with a 30 or 40 minute video. It's absolutely massive. And so it will be interesting to see whether more players come back to check out the stuff in the March update. Of course, there's a very small amount of new content with things like the event, but otherwise we've got some pretty good updates to existing things in the game. Obviously, whether that's enough to pull players who've sort of lapsed from Destiny back in at the moment isn't entirely clear, but that goal is probably more reserved for things like the April update, which Bungie have yet to reveal. Either way, let us know your thoughts down below. I'm certainly looking forward to it, and I hope you've enjoyed this quick rundown, or about as quick as we can make it anyway. So if you have, a rating below really helps us out on the channel, and if you're new around here and want to keep up to date with more Destiny content, then get subscribed and I'll keep you posted. But otherwise, cheers for tuning in, and I hope you guys have an awesome day.